So good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Ian Martin. I'm the chair of the United Nations Association of the UK, and it's my privilege to welcome you, and indeed I think to welcome quite a lot of you back into this room. It's pretty remarkable for a civil society organisation to fill Central Hall Westminster once in a year, and to do it twice, I think, is truly extraordinary. But this is not an ordinary year for the UN. It's a year, and you're going to hear a lot about this, when the UN is facing extraordinary challenges. And it's a year in which, of course, it selects the Secretary General to lead it in confronting those challenges. Up to and including the selection of Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, the selection of the Secretary General was an opaque process, essentially confined to the Security Council and very much to the permanent 5 members of the Security Council before someone emerged to be rubber-stamped by the General Assembly. There was no transparency to the wider membership, let alone to civil society. Ahead of the selection of Ban Ki-moon's successor in 2016, UNA UK took a lead in combining with other civil society organisations to create what was called the 1 for 7 billion campaign. And working with others, in particular the Accountability, Coherence and Transparency group of member states and the elders, but others too, we played a key role. UNA UK played a key role in opening up the 2016 process. For the first time, the candidates were known, the candidates were required to make public their vision statements, there were hearings in the General Assembly, and UNA UK was a pioneer in 2016 in holding civil society hustings, when 3 of the candidates, including the successful candidate, the other candidates might like to note that, Antonio Guterres, appeared at a hustings in the Barbican. We're again working with other CSOs at the centre of an expanded 1 for 8 billion campaign. And this year there is even greater civil society involvement, as well as our own hustings tonight. There will be an event in June in Geneva, organised by GWL Voices and the UN Foundation, an event in South Korea at the Jeju Forum, and we hope maybe other events too. But UNA UK is kicking off this important civil society opportunity. We're glad to be back at Central Hall Westminster, where UNA UK has hosted several Secretaries General in the past, and including this January, where the first meeting of the General Assembly took place in 1946. And so we're going to begin by showing you a very short video of our forward-looking UN at 80 event this January.
A choice is offered to mankind. Twice in my lifetime, a war has brought untold sorrow.
The nations of the world met to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war. 2025 was a profoundly challenging year for international cooperation and the values of the UN. Aid was slashed, inequalities widened, climate chaos accelerated, international law was trampled.
How many blows can an international order, can our United Nations endure?
Sometimes the darkest moments come just before the dawn.
This is not a moment to turn away from multilateralism.
We are here because each person in this room took a decision to get up and do something linked to a vision of a better world.
This planet is the only place where complex biology exists, the only place where meaning currently exists.
What is the new global social contract that we need for this day and age?
Women's exclusion is not about culture. It's about power.
We can channel problems into anger, or we can find a way inspired by the peacemakers of the past and the present.
The tremendous gains we have made over the past 80 years cannot be understated.
This Earth of ours is still singing.
I do not stand here as a critic of the UN. I stand here as someone who believes deeply in its potential.
The General Assembly, which we celebrate today, exists because of a simple truth. Humanity is strongest when we stand as one.
The United Nations needs you to remind all of us that the principles of the United Nations Charter are our common life insurance.
The world needs civil society movements that are fearless and persistent, that make it impossible for leaders to look away.
Thank you to the United Nations Association UK for standing up for multilateralism and international law, especially when the most powerful do not.
Go out and change the world. Well, hello, and thank you for joining us here at Central Hall Westminster with UNA UK as we continue our efforts to change the world. As you know, this particular selection process for the world's top diplomat comes at a critical juncture where it seems that humanity and the planet face multiple possible futures. And this is a time when determined people can seize the moment and insist that we need cooperation, fairness, and an overriding sense of the collective good to meet the challenges of the future. This room is full of brilliant people who care about the UN. And thank you to so many of you who have sent in your ideas for us to quiz the candidates from a place both of caring about the UN and wanting it to adapt. We greatly appreciate the time that these candidates are taking to be here today also, because it is a sign of their respect for civil society having a role and a voice in a process that traditionally was behind closed doors for governments alone. We need them. They have all served the UN in various capacities over the years, and also they need us. Whoever is the next Secretary General will need public support for their voice to resonate and for them to be able to exercise the soft power of the principled leadership of the UN. Now, to set the scene before our candidates are grilled, I have some incredible experts in store for you. And I would like to invite the panelists, please to come up by the stairs and take the stage. We will have Malloch-Brown, Thant Myint-U, and Margarita Gómez. I will be sitting here, and as they take the stage, please welcome them with your biggest London heatwave applause. Thank you all for being with us. And we're going to start with you, Margarita Gómez, who has flown into London especially to be here for this event. Margarita is a former diplomat from Mexico. She is currently the executive director of Southern Voice, which brings together voices on policy from around the global south. And they are a partner in a massive coalition, One for 8 billion, as Ian mentioned. At the time of the last Secretary General selection 10 years ago, this was 1 for 7 billion. Today, it is 1 for 8 billion. And Margarita's organisation has carried out a survey of organisations around the global south to understand their priorities for the UN and its leadership. I'm delighted to say that these survey findings are being shared with us here tonight for the first time. And Margarita, over to you. We'll have, please, Margarita's slides up because she is going to be the only person with slides today, I think, but in order to show the data more visibly, she will have them. Margarita, take it away.
Thank you so much, Jane. It is a pleasure to be here. Good evening, dear panelists, candidates, and appreciable audience.
You will need this, I have discovered.
Thank you so much. There is something symbolic to be here in this venue, where the first General Assembly was held 80 years ago. And at that moment, the idea was to build a multilateral system that could restrain power asymmetries and power of the countries, as well as to bring countries together. Today, that world has changed. We are in a different circumstances, in a different context. And that idea and that belief that the international cooperation and the UN could bring people together and countries together is being challenged. Drawing on African perspectives, Asian perspectives, Latin American, and the Caribbean, we have asked to the Global South civil society to explore what are the views of the UN, of the multilateral system, of the priorities that they should be for the international agenda, and what the desired leadership qualities should have the next Secretary General. And I want to start with some good news. The first good news is that we found that the United Nations is still relevant for the Global South. However, its political authority and its legitimacy is weakening. And what we found is that on one hand, we can see that the legitimacy of the United Nations is being supported by the Global South, and it's recognized their role in different topics, such as humanitarian support, climate governance, and norms setting. However, the legitimacy is being questioned in topics such as peacekeeping and human rights. At the same time, confidence in its political authority is low. And here is some important data. Just 4% of the participants consider that the United Nations has a political authority. And this should concern all of us. What are the reasons of this lack of political authority? And there are two main reasons. The first reason is the concentration of power among the 5 members of the Security Council. The second reason is the weak enforcement of the United Nations and the decisions that has been taken based on donor-driven structure. The Global South is particularly worried about how influence is distributed and how power is managed in the United Nations. Our second finding, the Global South is calling for a transformation in how the system distributes power and how the influence is led by the different actors, not mainly asking about better management of the United Nations. When exploring the perception about the reform, we identified that there are many concerns, but the concerns are not about bureaucracy, coordination, or institutional streamline that we have been hearing in many of the agenda. The concerns are about the capacity of the United Nations to really change power asymmetries in the decision-making process. The Global South is calling for 3 things. First, power on the agenda setting. Second, a stronger role of the General Assembly. And third, a stronger defense on human rights and security. Our third finding is that the Global South wants more a general than a secretary. There is an old question in the UN debate, and Mark and Thant know that, that is, what should be the role of the Secretary General? It should be a more secretary or a more general? And we got a response, clear response from the Global South. We want a leader, not just an administrator. And when we were exploring about the leadership qualities that these leaders should have, we identified that the leadership qualities should be political independence, the ability to lead the transformation, the institutional transformation, and the ability to navigate very complex contexts, the context that we are living today. That is complex, that is it's face poly-crisis, that requires also to be closer to the people.
And I'll ask you to wrap up in 1 minute.
There is just my final point, and this is our last message. The Global South is not abandoning the idea of the multilateralism. It's calling for a multilateralism that is more legitimate, that is more inclusive, that is more representative. It's calling for a United Nations that works for all, not for just few power representation. We are calling to also be closer to the people. The United Nations sometimes is very far away of the people's needs, and we are calling for that. And finally, I just want to share this question that was, it was the most popular question. We asked to the participants to share one question that they would like to ask to the candidates. And this is a question for the next panel. How the candidates and how the next Secretary General will strengthen global influence in the UN decision-making and agenda setting. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. So you heard it here first. And of course, we like at UNA UK to look both at the global and at the local. And I'm delighted now to turn to Malloch-Brown, who has been Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations, a long and stellar international career, and of course is from the UK. And I'm curious, Mark, how much do you think this resonates with what people in the UK think about the UN and the role of the Secretary General?
Well, look, first, it's wonderful to have a full room tonight. A lot of people still care about the United Nations, but I think there is a widespread disenchantment about, why is war flaring up? Why is climate change going unaddressed? Why is global inequality increasing? And we just don't see the UN doing very much effective to address that. So, I think this is a moment where a new Secretary General has to sort of ignite the latent optimism in a room like this and turn it into a sort of campaigning power to get back at the top table on a range of issues. And, I'm going to leave Thant to talk about peace and security, which he does very well. But I think around climate and humanitarian, these are issues which not just Brits, but people all around the world actually care about. And so a new Secretary General does have some very powerful themes to sort of ignite public attention to. But having said that, why is the UN wallowing in this difficult place at the moment? And, the first thing, I started first working for the UN as a very young intern immediately out of graduate school and have had 3 spells of my career in it across the years, so kind of know it well. But the first thing I'd say is the UN is more often in difficulties than it's doing well. It sort of goes with the territory because it holds a mirror or is a mirror to the state of international relations. And we had decades of the Cold War, etc. But innovative Secretary Generals were able during those periods to find issues they could really work on. The decolonization was an extraordinary, galvanizing, decades-long event for the UN system. An organization which had started with 48 signatories is now an organization of 193 member states. The UN was there at the birth of most of those new nation states. During the Cold War, there was a lot of conflicts where I, as a young refugee officer at the time, UN refugee officer, found myself deployed to front lines around the world, navigating between the proxy wars of the two superpowers of the day, but able to deliver extraordinarily ambitious humanitarian programs. So the genius of great Secretary Generals and of great UN leaders, because it's often much more than just the Secretary General, is to find those opportunities and exploit them, while at the same time, however difficult the political environment, not to betray the Charter. To understand this is an organization founded with an extraordinary element of vision and principle in 1945, which would be very hard to sum up again later, and to sort of live within that charter, to recognize that political deftness of touch requires you to push some issues, go a little slower on others, to navigate the treacherous waters of states who don't believe in all the principles of the Charter. But the good Secretary Generals have shown it can be done.
Thank you. Hear, hear. And I like your point about the campaigning power in this room. Please hold that thought. Thant Myint-U is a writer and historian and author of a book, Peacemaker, about you, Thant, his grandfather. You can buy a copy outside, and it's worth noting that over the last year since this book has been published, it has inspired a lot of debate about how the UN can rebuild a stronger role in peace and security. But Thant, you've also written about the different perceptions of the UN around the world, and it often seems that here in the UK, people talk as though the UN started in 1945 and then everything was great. 80 years of peace and prosperity, and then it's suddenly breaking down. And the reality is not so simple. I wonder if you could say a little bit more about the story of the UN from a more global and less Eurocentric perspective.
Sure. No, thank you very much, Jane. And I want first to echo Mark in saying how wonderful it is to see so many people here this evening. I want to echo Mark as well, because he used to be my boss 20 years ago. So it's a very comfortable position for me to come after Mark and say some of the same things. But I think thinking about history, I suppose maybe just a couple of points. I mean, first is, in a way, building on what Mark had said, I think what we have to really remember is that the UN has been very different things over these different decades. It's not been one thing. It was first conceived as this muscular alliance of the wartime powers that was going to who were going to continue to police the peace after the war ended, and those are the structures we have through the Security Council, for example. But then I think the UN over the mid to late 40s and into the 1950s really consolidated itself, evolved in two fundamental directions. And it really brought together two basic ideas that we still have with us today. I mean, the first is this belief amongst men and women who founded the UN in 1945 and around those years, who had lived as adults through two world wars that had killed nearly 100 million people and saw a Great Depression in between, that a different kind of global politics had to be possible, and that war, aggressive war, had to be outlawed and made a thing of the past. And I think that central principle of the UN is something that has animated the UN through many of these decades. But I think the second sort of principle that came a bit later, it's there in the Charter, some of the language, but really only came to fruition in the mid to late 1950s because of what Mark had mentioned, the successful fight for independence from dozens of different countries in Asia and Africa. And that was a separate conviction that having gone through centuries of colonial occupation, colonial rule, having fought for self-determination, having won independence, that the age of empire also had to be a thing of the past. And for these countries who embraced the UN, they didn't have to, but they embraced the UN, they saw the UN as a structure through which they wanted to work. They wanted to complete the process of decolonization, but they wanted to make decolonization real, so that it wasn't simply a matter of political independence, but it meant, as you were suggesting before, all of these new countries with the former colonial powers, North and South, East and West, working together to create a new global system which was genuinely inclusive, which would mean economic self-determination for countries as well as political sovereignty as well. But over these 8 decades, the UN has had these two principles of no war and no empire. But depending on the global politics of the time, depending on superpower relations, depending on many other things, it's gone up and down in terms of the ways in which the UN could actually operationalize these convictions, these ideas, use the institutions that it has, use the architecture that it has. And I think a big difference has been leadership. It's been the leadership of different Secretary Generals to be able to see at that particular moment, in that particular period of global politics, what has been possible. The last thing I would just say is that I think we also have to appreciate, and I'm sure many of the people in the room do, what a remarkable success the UN has been. In peacemaking, something that we sometimes forget about, because to be frank, there hasn't been that many peacemaking successes over the past few years, and we see wars in Ukraine, in the Middle East, in Sudan, and elsewhere, and people ask, and global publics ask, where is the UN? Why isn't the UN more effective? But we shouldn't forget that there is a long history of successful UN peacemaking from at least the 1950s onwards, that the UN has been tremendously successful also in the development of international law and norms into very recent times on a whole host of issues, especially since the 1990s. But perhaps more important than anything else, and I think this is what we should really keep front and center, is that it's not the case that member states simply came together and formed the UN. It's the UN that has been part of creating the world system that we have today, through decolonization, through the relationship between many of these newly independent states and that UN system, and the way in which they've transformed it and made it successful as well. So I think in this present moment, I think part of the reason we talk about rupture, we talk about crisis, is that a particular set of arrangements that we might call the rules-based order, the liberal international order, which has been really based on a specific moment in history around American supremacy and unilateral supremacy, is almost certainly coming to an end. And so we feel, and especially I think sitting here in the UK, being sort of almost ground zero in terms of the impact of that, together with some other European allies and others, I think we then see the whole world system is falling apart. But I think beneath that more recent set of UN roles and agendas, we have this deeper foundation, this deeper architecture around these agendas of no war and no empire that are as relevant as ever. And I think with the right leadership can be not just restored to its proper place at the center of global politics, but I think very soon actually can bring, be re-operationalized and really make a difference even in the wars of today.
So picking up on that point about leadership, based on your research and your work, I'd like to ask you firstly, what's your advice for the candidates? And secondly, what is your message to the UK government, given that the UK will have a voice in this process?
So first, I think that so the current UN Secretary General selection process goes beyond who is the next leader. I think that it represents a historical opportunity to really bring that leadership that we need for the momentum that we are living. And as based on what we have been hearing from the voices from the Global South, the breaking the concentration of power is necessary. We heard that the General Assembly can play an important role in the different processes of the decision making. The member states, as Mark was mentioning, we have more countries now. The whole power dynamic, economic dynamic has changed, and we really need to bring these member states to have a more important role. So the first one is we need really to work on breaking that concentration of power that is there. The second is, in this breaking the concentration of power, we need to bring meaningfully the Global South to play a role in the decision making. The last 2 weeks, I was mentioning to Mark and Thant that I was in different meetings. So there was a meeting in Paris on the future of development cooperation, a meeting here in London about the global partnerships. It is clear that, and all of you that are here today, it is clear that the need of rethinking the global system is there. So I think that that's one task that is needed. And then the second thing is, it's not just about technical skills. The next Secretary General will need a lot of political capacity, negotiation skills. It's also the willing to break with the colonization legacy and to change how the organization break. One final point, I think that also it's not about bureaucracy. It's not just about how can we make the United Nations works better. It's who is playing an important role in setting the agenda. And I think that that's one of the points. On the UK, just one final point, the UK has a historical responsibility, is one of the 5 members of the Security Council. So I think that the UK should play a more active role in these changes that we are looking to happen in the whole international system.
And Mark, I'd love to hear your thoughts on what the UK should be doing to ensure a credible process and a really strong, principled leader.
Well, look, as you know, I have fairly strong views on this, and
we like strong views.
Yeah, I'm going to let them loose in a second. But I think the reason why this is so important is, as we've all touched on here, there is an extraordinary shift going on. If the first UN was a Cold War UN of 2 superpowers, but the UN very much closer to one of those superpowers, the American hegemon, there was then the post-1989 period where, US leadership was in some ways even more untrammeled. And we simply cannot understate the profundity of this moment. We are shifting to a multi-owner United Nations, where a lot of countries, Mexico, but from your region also Brazil and others, are going to be major voices in the decision-making of the organization going forward. And small countries too. So we are moving to a totally different concept of practical ownership. This has one particular consequence. I do not see in the short term any easing of the gridlock and delegitimization of the Security Council. I just don't see a world which comes together enough to make the Security Council plausibly effective. 2 institutions, therefore, bubble up in importance. One is the General Assembly, and the other is the Secretary General. And a Secretary General who has the sort of diplomatic energy, forward ambition to sort of seize the moment and work with the General Assembly to find solutions to problems is, I think, going to be key. So what can the Brits do to help bring that about? my countrymen have been deeply passive over many years in their role, frankly, at the United Nations, and have on this issue in particular been wont to fall in behind the preference ultimately of the United States. It's time for that to finish. The actual constitutional mechanic of the election of a Secretary General requires 9 positive votes in the Council, including no exercise of a veto by the 5 permanent members. Until now, that has driven a sort of P3 negotiation primarily of the US, Russia and China. And there is a real risk that I don't think any of those 3 individuals smoke, but if they did, that in a smoke-filled room, the 3 presidents, might try to settle the candidacy. That is simply not good enough for a world that we live in today. Britain holds the key to ensuring that that is not what happens. My suggestion to a British government, and strangely the British government seems distracted at the moment. I don't know why, but it seems to have difficulty focusing on this. But, my suggestion to the British government is come out very publicly as a guardian of the process. Insist that you will not let a candidate through to Security Council approval who has not secured the support of the General Assembly and expose themselves to full examination by the General Assembly. So no late candidates, no closed deals in the Security Council, and a deliberate effort to rebalance the process of selection away from the Security Council holding all the cards to one where the General Assembly's point of view is taken in and respected. The easiest way is for Britain and perhaps France to, in that sense, in the straw vote process, just refuse to let a candidate through and say they won't let a candidate through until that test of General Assembly support is met. The so-called E10, which is the elected members of the council, they can also have a role in this because there have to be 9 votes. So, if a group of them refused again to let a candidate through, they could block. It seems less likely, frankly, given the divisions in that group and the heavy sort of arm leaning on them of the P3 that would happen. A third and final defense would be that the General Assembly itself exercised an until now not used constitutional power to send the Security Council's nomination back and refuse to endorse it. So there are ways of blocking a kind of closed process. And for the 4 candidates we're hearing tonight, they have bravely come forward and put themselves up as candidates. In fairness to them and to others who have not declared themselves because they think the process is fixed and loaded, Britain coming out and saying this and saying we're going to support an open process would do 2 things. It would flush out other candidates to come in now, and it would allow an open debate amongst all of them, which engages the whole membership of the UN before a favoured candidate emerges. But, at the moment, there is a risk that's not the way it goes, and that, we will look back on tonight as a rare moment of open democracy in a system which then goes back behind a P3 closed door.
So before I turn to Thant with the final question, I just want to recap. We're hearing that this is a moment of profound historical significance and that there is an opportunity for the right candidate to make the most of this moment. We're also hearing that the UK does have a privileged position of influence over this decision. And yet it seems to me that the public awareness about this process and the candidates and the whole fact that there is a change of leadership is very low. And I would encourage all of you who are here afterwards, please talk to people about this. Talk to your friends, your neighbours, your workmates. Try to help us spread awareness. We will have a lot of media coverage, I believe, of tonight. We will be making the videos available subsequently on our YouTube. But also, if you agree with what you've been hearing, why not write to your MP? The process has been discussed recently in the House of Lords, but the House of Commons is, of course, preoccupied with many other things. But we have a long track record of cross-party support for the UN and for Britain's role in it. So if you care about what you're hearing, maybe try to find those ways to make your voice heard at this important time. With that, Thant, I would like to turn to you and to say, based on your work and on your book, what's your advice for the candidates? And could you close with a message for the British diplomats who are thinking hard about their role in this process?
Yeah, no, thank you very much. I mean, I agree that we're at this profoundly important moment in global history, not just because of the UN institution and where it might go, but because we don't really know where global peace is going to go. And I think we're all very worried about the wars that we've seen over the past years. And we sense that the future is very unpredictable. We don't know if something is going to unravel, which will lead to more wars and even nuclear confrontation over the coming years. And the UN is first and foremost a global peace organization. And the choice of the Secretary General makes all the difference because we've inherited this architecture from 1945, which I don't think will change anytime soon. It would be wonderful if the Security Council could be reformed in some way, but I think we shouldn't hold our breath. I think it would be very good if the General Assembly took a more active and dynamic role. But at the end of the day, at least over these coming years, which could be very important few years, the Secretary General of the UN, if that person could become again the chief mediator in the world and be that neutral voice, that neutral point of reference, the person who is not going to stop any wars on his or her own, but at least in every single war shows that the UN is not just concerned in terms of statements, but shows dynamism, shows a presence, shows a courage in terms of a willingness to insert him or herself into that conflict, and helps to shape a UN option for what a path to peace might look like. I think in terms of the next Secretary General of the UN, I would say one of the most important things is that that person has to be able to read the historical moment that we're in. And that's difficult because we don't really know what moment we're in and what the next decade or so might look like. But in the way that Hammarskjöld, I think, in the 1950s and Thant in the 1960s felt that decolonization was the great dynamic of their day, and that was what was going to give them some room vis-a-vis the superpowers and create some space for the office of the Secretary General for mediation, for good offices, for peacemaking. It's for the next Secretary General to judge what the moment is that we're in. And in the realistic or the real politics between the big powers, between the US, between China, Russia, but also global South countries, other countries, what is that political strategy that's going to maximize the space that the Secretary General has or could have to play that mediation role? I think that's really important. I think obviously the temperament of the person, there are many other qualities and things that we would want to see in that person. I think courage and a willingness to take risks is incredibly important. But I think we also have to be realistic in thinking that, no Secretary General, even the perfect Secretary General, is not going to be a miracle worker. And throughout history, throughout these 8 decades, Secretaries General have been successful if 2 other sort of ingredients are there. I think the first is that the superpowers or the big powers give that person at least a degree of space to operate. And so the relationship between the Secretary General and the biggest powers is not unimportant. But there has to be an additional coalition set group of countries, and the UK could obviously be one, that really invest in his or her office and really put some of their own political capital on the line to try to make that office a success and the peacemaking work of the Secretary General a success. And maybe to end, to say that the third kind of important component, if we have the right Secretary General, the right mix of countries, including the UK, willing to take some risks and invest in the UN again, is public sentiment. And I think unless the public is re-energized and remobilized, not to have this kind of general faith in the UN. I don't think that's going to happen overnight, but is mobilized to at least give the UN a try, to look, not be indifferent, and to look at the UN again. I think we need a Secretary General who can help in that process, but I think the work of the UNA UK, other organizations, hopefully others as well, to remobilize interest, again, not primarily in the UN, but the agenda of global peace and the way in which the UN revitalized under new leadership for global peace can make a difference going forward.
Thank you very much. And we've certainly seen from the many questions that people suggested online that peace and adapting for a different future were the top themes that were coming up again and again. There is a hunger for that. Well, thank you for setting the scene so well. Please feel free to leave the stage to more applause. Thank you so much. And after you step down, we will dim the lights and have a short video message from Helen Clark of the Elders, a former Prime Minister of New Zealand and herself a former candidate for this top role. So if we can roll the video, that would be wonderful. Thank you very much.
The new Secretary-General will be taking office in a time of enormous challenge. So the new Secretary-General comes in, has to be prepared to use every tool in the convening box which is available. This person has to be a very good diplomat. They have to be very empathetic with the world's peoples facing all these challenges. They have to be a very good communicator. We're looking for a leader who can rally the world to meet this moment, and it's a very challenging moment. If a woman is elected, this shows that the UN is open to change. A great woman Secretary-General will bring a woman's perspective. She will communicate empathy. She will put the issues of gender equality to the fore. She will insist on upholding the women, peace and security agenda. She will use all those skills associated with the best of women's leadership to bring people together to find solutions. Ideally, the UN General Assembly should be doing the selection. The practice has been that the Security Council sends one name to the General Assembly. Wouldn't it be wonderful if they sent 2 or 3 names to give the General Assembly at this time at least a choice? At least one of those names should be a woman's name. So that would be a tremendous step forward. What concerns many among the member states and the civil society is that, in effect, the selection is made by a very small number of member states, and that is those with the veto. That's why, at this point, this isn't a democratic process, and the more we can involve the General Assembly in making a genuine choice, the better. It's an opportunity to say no office in the international system is off limits for women. We are going to make a choice that it is time that a woman takes this job, and we're going to do everything we can to support that woman to do the best job for humanity.
So thanks to our friends at the Elders for that straight-talking message. And now, of course, we get ready for the moments that you've all been waiting for, where you will have a chance to hear from the candidates themselves. And I'm really delighted that these discussions will be moderated by the wonderful Lyse Doucet, Chief International Correspondent at the BBC, constantly flying around the world. We're happy that she's been able to be here in London tonight, and a nice touch also to have someone from a great British institution, but someone who's also Canadian, given today's talk of middle powers. So I will welcome Lyse, who will be entering from backstage, and she will introduce the second half of the evening.
Good evening. You came here to have a voice? Good evening, good evening. As Jane so kindly said, I work for the BBC, I'm Canadian, but let me say for the purposes of tonight, I'm here like all of you. A citizen, and dare I speak for all of us in saying, a citizen ever more worried about our world, which is why we are all here tonight at this event hosted by the UN Association in the United Kingdom. As Jane Kinnaman said, we meet at a historic time, the leader the world needs. The appointment of a new Secretary General is possibly one of the most consequential decisions to be taken by member states. And as we've been hearing tonight, this is a process that must be taken, not just by the UN Security Council, and God forbid, just by 3 powers, as Malloch-Brown emphasized, but also by the General Assembly. The Secretary General, as we've been hearing, has a unique mandate. He or she should be the world's mobilizer in chief to confront global challenges, should be the world's top diplomat, should be the leader which ensures that the United Nations serves all of its 8 billion citizens. Antonio Guterres, at the end of 2 terms, will leave the 38th floor on December the 31st this year. A new Secretary General will move in on the 1st of January next year. The selection process began in earnest November last year. And as you've been hearing so far, 5 candidates have thrown their hat into the ring. Others could still choose to put their name forward. And we are very honored tonight here in London with all of you to have 4 of these candidates. The 5th, Macky Sall, former president of Senegal, has not made himself available. Whoever emerges will take the helm at what is, and as we've been hearing tonight, an existential moment for this organization. And I think if any of the candidates had been listening in to our distinguished panelists, some of them may decide to pull out of the race, some of the challenges that are there. But they won't. The United Nations needs a leader who will take charge when resources have never been under such strain, where the relevance of the UN has never been questioned. And everything about our world, from peace and security to the climate crisis, to the respect or the lack of respect for the rule of law, including the rules of war, means that there needs to be someone with the kind of competence, with the kind of compelling personality, the kind of charisma who can take over at the helm. And as you've been hearing, this underlines how important that this process be transparent, be merit-based, and also be accountable. I just want to see, given that we've had such a really excellent introduction to some of the challenges that the new Secretary General will face, how many in this audience believes that the choice of the right individual can help put the pieces back together again of what, dare I say, is now a broken system? How many believe that this process really matters? Let's see. Anyone thinks it's simply too late for any individual? Okay. We are a democracy, after all. It matters. And this is what this evening is all about. The United Nations Association for the UK is a member of the 1.8 billion campaign. So they are providing this stage for the candidates to speak in front of all of you. And there's also been a process where they have sought questions far and wide. Tonight will not be a BBC interview, it is your interview. The UN has made, UNA for UK has made difficult choices about which questions to include. We thank all of you who did submit questions. Sadly, if you weren't contacted by the UN, your question will not be used tonight, either in person or by me. But the UN team here has tried to ensure that there is a broad representation of the concerns that have been mentioned. Our four candidates tonight are Michelle Bachelet, former President of Chile, former UN Commissioner for Human Rights; Maria Fernanda Espinosa, former President of the UN General Assembly, former Foreign Minister of Ecuador; Rafael Grossi, who is now the head of the International Atomic Energy Agency, also a former Argentine diplomat; and lastly, Rebecca Greenspan, who is the Secretary General of UNCTAD and also former Vice President of Costa Rica. Please give a warm round of applause for all four candidates who are going to do. And finally, let me just explain how this is going to proceed. Each candidate will be given 5 minutes to set out their story about why they should have this job. I will then follow up with 2 questions, one about why they are suited, secondly, their position on the integrity, the principles of integrity as part of the 1.8 billion campaign. And then we will use some of the questions, some of you will ask questions, and some of the questions I will read on behalf of those who submitted them.